When a routine traffic stop turns into a career-defining moment, a police officer's worst assumptions collide with a truth he never saw coming. His target is the man who holds his future in his hands. The sun was starting its descent over the streets of Sacramento, painting the sky with streaks of gold and amber. Eric Porter was on his way home after a long day at the office. His sedan hummed softly as he adjusted the air conditioning, eager to shake off the day's stress. The radio played faintly in the background, a soothing antidote to the bustling city streets. He approached a yellow light, slowing down just as it turned red. That's when the blue and red lights erupted behind him, accompanied by the sharp blare of a police siren. Eric glanced in his rearview mirror, his brows furrowing slightly. He pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down his window as a police cruiser parked behind him. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson, mid-30s, with a buzz cut and a badge gleaming on his chest. Larson adjusted his belt as he swaggered toward Eric's car, exuding the confidence of someone used to being in control. "License and registration," Larson said curtly, his voice flat but laced with a hint of authority. Eric complied without a word, reaching into his glove compartment for his registration and handing over his driver's license. His movements were deliberate and calm, but he could feel Larson's gaze scrutinizing him, as if searching for a reason to dig deeper. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, leaning closer to the window. "I'm not entirely sure," Eric replied evenly, his tone polite but firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson said, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. Eric frowned but nodded slightly. "I see. I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand." Larson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing as he studied Eric more closely. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore, at least not for Larson. His posture shifted, subtly but noticeably, as if he had already decided this was more than a minor infraction. The officer glanced at the license in his hand. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. Eric hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Larson wasn't really listening. His questions were starting to take on an edge, just enough to suggest that he wasn't concerned about a traffic violation anymore. Eric's calm demeanor seemed to irk him, and he leaned in closer. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Eric replied. His tone remained steady, but the subtle shift in the air was impossible to ignore. Larson didn't just see Eric as a driver anymore. He saw something else, something that warranted suspicion. Eric could sense the tension building, but he didn't flinch. Little did Officer Larson know the calm exterior wasn't naivety, it was control. This was just the beginning. Larson took a step back, folding Eric's documents with an exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. He straightened up, his expression shifting into something faintly smug, as though he'd already made up his mind about the man sitting in front of him. "Step out of the car for me," Larson ordered. Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly, but his face betrayed no reaction. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" he asked, his tone measured. Larson's lips twitched, but he masked it quickly. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The threat hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. Eric exhaled slowly and opened the door. As he stepped out, Larson's eyes flicked over him, sizing him up. Eric stood a little taller than the officer, his shoulders broad, but his demeanor unthreatening. His tailored suit suggested professionalism. His polished shoes hinted at someone meticulous and careful. Yet, none of that seemed to matter. Larson gestured toward the front of the car. "Hands where I can see them." Eric complied, his movements calm and deliberate. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Larson smirked faintly. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Eric turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Larson. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch, and for a moment Larson's composure faltered. He straightened up, his hand drifting toward his belt, more reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question. Eric replied. There was no defiance in his voice, just a quiet firmness that seemed to unsettle the officer. Larsson leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. You seem awfully familiar with how this works. You got something to hide? Eric let the silence stretch for a beat before answering. No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know. Larsson scoffed, but didn't reply. He stepped back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic was shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. Eric wasn't reacting the way most people would. There was no fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there was control, poise, and an unsettling calm that put Larsson on edge. You seem pretty confident, Larsson muttered, almost to himself. Like you think you know what's going to happen next. Eric didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is. Larsson froze for half a second, before turning back to face him. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come out. Eric's composure was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched, the tension between them felt electric, and Larsson was starting to realize this wasn't going to play out the way he'd expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. The real test was about to begin. Larsson tapped his fingers against the holster on his belt, his frustration barely concealed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Eric. His gaze flicked back to the sedan, as though searching for a justification he hadn't yet manufactured. Turn around and place your hands on the hood, Larsson said, his voice clipped. I need to check for weapons. Eric raised an eyebrow. Weapons? He repeated, his tone incredulous but still measured. Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon? Larsson's jaw tightened, and for a moment his composure cracked. I'm not going to ask you again. Eric hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. Then, without a word, he turned and placed his palms flat against the hood of his car. Larsson approached, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt breaking the uneasy silence. The officer patted Eric down in quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little longer than necessary. It wasn't just a search. It was an attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But Eric didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't so much as shift under the invasive scrutiny. You're clean, Larsson muttered, stepping back. The admission sounded begrudging, like he was irritated that he hadn't found anything to justify his suspicion. Eric turned to face him, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. Of course I am, he said simply. Now, officer, if you're done. I'm not done, Larsson interrupted, his voice rising slightly. The words tumbled out too quickly, betraying his need to stay in control. You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why? Eric folded his arms, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement, he said. Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years. Larsson's eyes narrowed. That's so. You a lawyer or something? Eric smiled faintly. Or something. The ambiguity in his answer seemed to irritate Larsson further. He stepped closer, invading Eric's personal space, his voice dropping to a near growl. Listen. You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this? Eric met his gaze evenly, unflinching. I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far I'm not seeing much of it here. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Larsson took the bait. Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you always? He stopped himself abruptly, the words lingering like smoke even though they hadn't fully escaped. Eric's expression didn't change, but something about his posture shifted, a subtle but unmistakable signal that he'd caught exactly what Larsson had left unsaid. People like me, Eric repeated, his voice soft but charged with meaning. Larsson bristled, stepping back as if realizing he'd just crossed a line he